Mega Man X is a spin-off series that has had various bosses, whether those would be the Mavericks, Mechaniloids, and the topic of this video, antagonists. While Sigma is the main antagonist in most of the series and is first when talking about the Mega Man X villains, there are some interesting antagonists that aren't the main villain, and that's what this video is all about, ranking the various antagonists that are not Sigma. But before we start this ranking, I need to go set some rules. Number 1, no Sigma. Number 2, these characters must originate from the game, so no Mega Mission or Giga Mission characters. Number 3, they must also come from one of the main entries, which are X1 through X8 and both Mega Man Extreme games, so none of that Command Mission or X-Dive nonsense. Number 4, certain characters will be grouped into one rank so that way this list isn't padded out while suffering from not having much to say about multiple rankings. Thank you to the following people for their gameplay footage, links to their content in the description. Now that we've gone through all of that, it's time to rank the non-Sigma antagonists of Mega Man X. Number 14. You know, I expected the guy from X7 to be at the bottom of the list at first, but here we are. The Shadow Hunters, Giemel and Zane, are antagonists working with Techno in Mega Man Extreme, a duo of Reploids rumored to be linked to unsolved crimes, now being forced to serve under the likes of Sigma after being defeated by the Maverick Menace. Both share some great designs, with Giemel sporting a ninja look and Zane having this heavy knight appearance. With that said, only one of the two has anything going for them. Zane is a blank slate. Aside from his sword, there is nothing to him. If anything, Giemel is more interesting with him enacting revenge against X after defeating Zane, and trying to hack the mother computer himself. While I understand that it is likely because of it being a Game Boy Color entry, it is a shame these two appear in Little Media and end up as the equivalent of templates for minion characters for the villain. Oh well, it could be worse. It could be Techno and not even make the list. Number 13. Out of every character on this list with story importance, Izok has to be the most wasted character out of all of them. Izok is a scientist that works alongside Gate, blaming the Zero Nightmare for the Nightmare incident in Mega Man X6. It's theorized that Izok is actually a certain scientist from 20XX based on his hatred for X and fascination with Zero, even referring to him as the ultimate robot. It was clear Capcom had something in mind, especially since the spirit that inhabited the Reploid disappears. But even with that, there's not much to him. While he does have more of a connection to the story of Mega Man X6, he doesn't have many moments where he does anything, and that plotline gets tossed out in Mega Man X7. A shame, because it's obvious that they plan to do something with the character, or at least the spirit that inhabited the Reploid. But alas, that's how it plays out. Oh, Izok, if only you had been done better, maybe you would have had a better impact on the series. Number 12. Describing Dynamo and his placement here is a lot like describing Izok, mainly with how he is in the series. I think his laid-back attitude is a real standout for him, not even having a grudge against the Maverick Hunters. His design and weapon are also really distinct from the rest of the antagonists. With that said though, he does suffer from the same problem as Izok, where there wasn't much to him story-wise. It's even stranger since Mega Man X5 was intended to be the finale of the X series, so Dynamo teleporting away and having no importance is questionable. It also doesn't help that while he was in X6 and was trying to get stronger by collecting the Nightmare Souls, that was his last appearance in the mainline entries. Dynamo, a character that would be great to see again, but with some importance to the story. Number 11. Hymax is a character I always felt was overrated. Of course, Hymax isn't exactly going to be a character most think of when it comes to this series. He does a good job at getting what he is about in X6. The idea of an antagonist with arrogance because of him being a perfect Reploid with stoicism and quiet frustration is a great idea. The design he has also fits well, having this towering titan appearance as the leader of the Nightmare Investigators. His near invincibility is a very unique ability that leads to one of my favorite boss fights in the game. His interactions with X and Zero are also good, with his dialogue showing his arrogant side while viewing the Maverick Hunters as fools. However, there are not many times when we see him as this titan to be feared. Because of his near invincibility, he's put as the second boss to appear in the secret parts of levels and doesn't have any effect on the story. Then again, that's to be expected from minions of a major antagonist. Despite having a short lifeline, Hymax is a good example of making a high-ranking minion of Gate. Number 10. The Soul Erasers, a reckless duo fueled and killed by the ambitions of Burkana. Burkana and Gareth are an example of good, simple villains from a Game Boy entry in the series. Both have some really good designs, with Burkana being a witch and Gareth as a knight. Their goal, while similar to Gate, works well here and fits with the story of the game. Gareth, being the more level-headed of the two, is also neat. A shame that Gareth's pet lion was cut though. Attacks also fit well with the character designs, especially Berkana's magic attacks. It would have been better if Berkana was the main villain rather than Sigma, especially since Sigma doesn't appear until the very end of Extreme 2, but the way they are isn't bad either. Number 9. The Nightmare Police, characters that share a similar role as Hymax, have a lot going for them. While some of the characterization relating to Bit and Byte originate from the Iwamoto manga, notably Bit's Merry Christmas line, there are aspects about them that make them a good duo. First is their designs. These designs are some of the best in the series, being based on various elements of Buddhism and Hinduism, so seeing aspects of those religions be a part of a Mega Man X character is amazing. Being creations of Dr. Doppler himself and said to be the most technologically advanced of Reploids, it adds to how dangerous they are compared to regular Mavericks. But I have to bring up their fusion, which, I hope I'm saying this right, God Car Machine O Inari. I would say this is the most known detail about them, and it makes sense because it looks great and is a memorable boss from X3. With minions like Bit and Byte, they are surely a good duo. Although, I don't think we have ever gotten an answer about Bit's shield. Number 8. For being known as the X-Hunters, they're sure good at not hunting down X. The X-Hunters are some of the more unknown characters with nothing on their backstory aside from how they took leadership out of what was left of Sigma's rebellion after Sigma's defeat in X1. They do have some importance to X2's story as they hold the parts of Zero and are how Sigma is rebuilt. The most interesting trait that's related to Sergus specifically is a connection to another villain in the Mega Man series, as we see in his dialogue in the original Japanese version that was for some reason removed in the English release. Now that I think about it, the X-Hunters are sort of the blueprint used to create the Guardians in the Mega Man Zero series. In fact, they were referred to as the Guardians during X2's development. Their designs are also interesting, particularly Violin, who has this stocky, spiked look with a pig-like face. Sucks that his second form for the X-Hunter stages was scrapped though. They also have a good variety of abilities such as blade slashes, a moving spike ball, and Sergus's backflips that shoot laser shots. So while they are not exactly the most memorable characters in the series, they make up for it with their role in the story and abilities. Although I am curious on one thing. If X-Kai is considered the 4th X-Hunter in spin-off material, does that mean there's a possibility of him being canon? Number 7. You know, for coming from one of the worst video games I ever played, Red is one of the few good parts of X7. Despite having a very similar role to General from X4, the major antagonist as manipulated by the main villain, Red is an interesting take on that idea. There's a sort of tragedy to Red, with how he never had the intention to harm innocent Reploids and desired to work as a vigilante that would end up getting influenced and betrayed by the main villain. Red's characterization through his dialogue also showcases his good nature with scenes such as not having the desire to end the Maverick Hunters, or how he wanted Axel to continue on without him. His design works well with how he goes for a Reaper look that fits perfectly for a leader of a vigilante group, and has this appearance that makes him look evil but actually isn't. The only flaw relating to Red, and it's mainly because of the game itself, is how his moments played out because the times we see him in cutscenes take place before the events of the game begin, but appear as if they are happening as the player progresses. It also doesn't help that we don't see many moments of Axel and Red, so we don't know much about the connection between the two aside from what's given. Oh well, at least Red is an example of how to take a character idea that's already been used and transform it in a way that makes it different and work well. Number 6. With how little screen time we see of Double, he makes a major and memorable surprise in X4. Double is one of the most ruthless Mavericks in the series. The appearance of a clumsy Reploid that's eager to help but turns out to be a ruthless murderer was really cool, especially with the music and how the reveal scene plays out. It's even more interesting that the fluid metal seen in Double's design being as how he changes between the two designs is really clever. It's also interesting how Double's betrayal affects X during the end of the game, being one of the characters X reflects on in asking Zero to kill him if he became a Maverick. His attacks fit well with his character, with blades being a part of most of his attacks. Also, the fact that using his weakness makes his boss fight even more difficult is a nice change. Even though Double had little screen time in X4, he surely made an impact on the story of that game. Number 5. Dr. Doppler, the mad scientist of Mega Man X3, is one of the more prominent antagonists in the series. Whether that would be from X3 to the X3 manga to the Mega Mission card series, he's been in various pieces of content. The mad scientist, who was once selfless and willing to help cure the Maverick virus, ends up getting infected by it and becomes the mad scientist we fight against. Doppler, much like Red, represents this sense of tragedy with how he was once a Reploid that wanted to help society, that would later on be influenced under the Maverick virus and go mad. Dr. Doppler was basically the main villain of X3 in not only the artwork, but also how he plays a major role in the story. Not only commanding the Doppler army, but also bringing back Vile, how he was able to resurrect Sigma, and how his story plays out. Having abilities such as a charge, firing electric shots, and a shield that can heal him make him a fierce opponent for X. Last thing to note is his last part in the story, coming to his senses and realizing what he's done. Depending on whether Zero is alive, he'll sacrifice himself to stop Sigma because of his feeling of being the only way to atone. This type of character development isn't seen in most of the antagonists here. A shame he wasn't in XI because it would have been cool to see him with new artwork in that art style. The reason why he ranks 5th here is solely because the last 4 villains on here are better in my eyes. But hey, at least we got one of the coolest villains in the series. Number 4. Colonel and General are some of the most notable characters within the X series, even if they only appeared for one game and nothing else. General's role in X-War's story being someone that just wanted Reploid independence, but that desire ends up being his downfall by the likes of Sigma, make him a really sympathetic villain. He didn't even hate humans, he just wanted the best for Reploids, making him one of the most interesting antagonists in the series. His unique design adds points with him being the size of a giant. Just don't ask about that one cutscene with him and Sigma. As for Colonel, while he is more interesting when playing as Zero, it best shows his character and importance in X4. Colonel's rivalry and friendship with Zero, pride being his imperfection, and how his death affects how the story plays out adds to the drama in Zero's campaign. Colonel and General are great characters that are strengthened by the story of X4, but are ranked 4th here because of 3 major antagonists that made a much bigger impact. Number 3. Luminate was guaranteed to rank high amongst the various antagonists on here. He is one of the few villains to actually be the final boss in the X series. This had never been a thing, at least in the mainline series, until X8. His whole motif of being the true leader leading the new generation Reploids with his divine being is unique. It's most noticeable when we are first introduced to him with the music and how he talks. His design also fits his motif, with white and lavender as the main colors of the design, and having a gender ambiguous appearance with the hair along with the voice. His second form fits perfectly, being the opposite of Sigma's demonic appearance in that game, and having the look of a seraph angel. Makes sense with all the biblical references. His abilities include not just the lasers in his second form, but also using the desperation attacks when the Mavericks feel like a test of what we had to go through. I would say the only objective imperfection with Luminate is the lack of screen time, as we only see him at the very beginning and the end. I understand why that is, but it's still a shame regardless. My personal flaw, on the other hand, with him is that he ends up setting up a plotline that would never be resolved. It was clear that they were going to make a Mega Man X9, but that never came to fruition. But still, I think Luminate is definitely one of the best antagonists to come out of the X series. Number 2. Gay has no right to be this good of a villain, but man is he a great villain. The mad scientist villain at its best with the backstory, what he does in X6, and his backstory make him the second best antagonist on this list. His backstory being his genius causing his downfall with his peers sabotaging his work is told well in the in-game dialogue, highlighting what happened with the Reploids he made, and one of the cutscenes having Alia tell Gates' backstory from her perspective. Gates' design looks good, but his combat form has this sharp, clean look that makes him look like a ruler. Of course, he would have a major impact on X6's story with creating the Nightmare Investigators, the creation of Hymax, and setting up the Nightmare Incident himself. His use of the Nightmare Virus as a means of natural selection for his ideal Reploid society is such an interesting way to taking over the world. However, what brings him from being ranked first is how he goes out. After defeating Gate, he resurrects Sigma as his trump card. It would have been better if Sigma wasn't involved and Gate was the final boss. Overall, Gate is an example of making a great antagonist in the Mega Man X series, but there is one that is the best. But before we move on to number 1, let's go over the honorable mentions. Number 1. This was probably obvious to those who played the series. Being one of the few antagonists to reappear in the X series, he leaves a major impact in all 4 games he appears in. First is in X1, where he defeats X with the greatest of ease in the first level in the game, setting up how much of a threat he is and with his ride armor. His design is perfect, being this cold and merciless Maverick while having this Boba Fett-esque look to him. Next is in X3, where he didn't really follow Dr. Doppler's orders and sets up a whole stage to lure X in and kill him, whether it was by him or the location blowing up. While his design wasn't changed drastically, he still has a great color scheme and a cool looking ride armor. In XA, he played the role of quote-unquote kidnapping Luminate and has a very different design with this militaristic look to him. He also has the vision of a world with new generation Reploids, having potential implications of a major upgrade to him. Finally, in Maverick Hunter X, his character was fleshed out with a sense of jealousy and bitterness towards X, which came from the constant appreciation of X by other Reploids and would motivate him to outdo X and not care for the world. He was even playable in a separate mode of that game. Vile is the perfect example of creating an antagonist that is memorable in every game he's in, being fleshed out in one of those entries, and looks awesome in every way. And that is why Vile is the best non-Sigma antagonist of the X series. So that was my ranking of the various non-Sigma antagonists. Do you guys agree or disagree with this list? Leave your rankings of these characters in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.